This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
U.S. Secretary of Defense Robert Gates held talks with his Israeli counterpart as well as the Israeli Prime Minister on the topic of the Iranian nuclear program. Gates set a September deadline to receive a response from Iran regarding a call for negotiation with the U.S. Meanwhile, Ehud Barak hinted that all indications are leaning toward a military action against Iran. Ziad Halabi has the details in the following report.
The Iranian nuclear issue was the hot topic at the bargaining table of the U.S. Secretary of Defense and his Israeli counterpart. Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak said that any dialogue between the United States and Iran must be held over the short run, urging Washington and the European countries to prepare new crippling sanctions against Iran. Gates urged Israel to consult Washington before carrying out a preemptive military strike against Iran.
We prefer to defend ourselves by ourselves and not mandate our conditions on the U.S. over negotiating with Iran. The dialogue with Iran must be limited, and we must prepare for a new round of international sanctions under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. There is no question that Iran with nuclear weapons is a threat to Israel and the U.S., as well as others. It is important to take every opportunity to try to persuade Iran to reconsider what is actually in its security interest. We are doing so through the dialogue announced by President Obama. We are waiting for a response by the next meeting of the UN General Assembly.
Along with the Iranian nuclear issue, strategic cooperation between the United States and Israel was the focus of talks between Gates and Netanyahu. Gates advised the Israeli government of dealing seriously with the peace initiative in the region. Meanwhile, U.S. Mideast envoy George Mitchell has launched efforts to revive the peace process. Mitchell is proposing to bring the Arab states to an international conference similar to that which was held in Madrid. This news comes despite the fact that both the U.S. and the Israeli sides are still in this agreement over the issue of a settlement freeze.
The U.S. and Israel have agreed over the Iranian issue. There is no way that Israel will offer concessions at this time due to the Iranian nuclear program, which is not only a threat to Israel's security but also to the world's.
Later in the week, the U.S. National Security Advisor will arrive in Israel to discuss the common strategic concerns of both sides. This variant position over the issue of settlement freeze has not disrupted the strategic ties between the United States and Israel. It seems that Israel is trying to manipulate U.S. policies toward Tehran despite the difference in priorities to both sides. While Israel sees the Iranian issue as its priority, the United States sees the regional settlement as its priority. Ziad Halabi, Al-Arabiya, West Jerusalem.
Joining us from Kuwait is Dr. Abdallah Al-Shaiji, the head of the U.S. Studies program and the professor of political science at Kuwait University. Dr. Abdallah, why did Gates choose Tel Aviv as a place to issue threats and announce plans regarding the Iranian nuclear program?
Gates did not choose Israel to make such an announcement. It seems that the entire U.S. administration is preoccupied with this Israeli issue. Yesterday, in a program for NBC, former U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice spoke about Israel and the U.S.'s commitment to protect it. Rice also talked about diplomacy with Iran. Gates came to reiterate the U.S. position on the region. 4 U.S. top officials have visited Israel in the past week. Mitchell and Gates visited Israel, and James Jones, the U.S. National Security Advisor, will arrive in Israel tomorrow. It seems that the U.S. is trying to ask Israel for more consultation as well as reassurance. The U.S. Secretary of State said that her administration will give countries in the region, especially the Gulf states, a security blanket. This issue did not receive enough coverage by the Arab media. What does this mean? Is it a nuclear umbrella that the U.S. is trying to give countries in the region? Has the U.S. become certain that it must deal with Iran as a country with nuclear capabilities? Israel expressed concern over the position adopted by the U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who made the remarks a few days ago in Thailand. The U.S. administration told the New York Times 2 days ago that the statement represents Clinton's personal opinion, and it doesn't reflect the official position of the administration. This is in order to reassure Israel.
Iranian news agency Muharram reported that the elected President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad will take the oath of the office as the President of Iran for a second session on August 5th.
Disputes between Ahmadinejad and the Conservative Party that he belongs to are openly shown after he appointed his son-in-law, Esfandiyar Rahim Mashai, as vice president, then sacked him from the position before choosing him as his presidential consultant.
The news agency said that the Ahmadinejad was satisfied with sacking the Minister of Intelligence, and he reconsidered ousting the Minister of Culture to avoid a crisis with the parliament that might lead to holding a vote of confidence against his government before its tenure ends.
هذه الصورة ربما تصبح أثرا من الماضي.
This picture may be only the remains of the past. The president is kissing the hand of the supreme leader, voiding the distances that might exist between them. But what happened lately in Iran may have created a rift between them and may have made it even bigger. Something that a quiet crisis between the two is initially caused by Ahmadinejad's appointment of his son-in-law as his deputy, which compelled the supreme leader to write to the president pointing out that this appointment is harmful to him and to his government. Ahmadinejad obeyed the supreme leader after some hesitation and sacked his son-in-law. But he has not given him up completely and appointed him to be his consultant, who will be responsible for running his office. Another cause for the crisis is that right after appointing his son-in-law, Ahmadinejad sacked a number of ministers. Some said that he sacked 4 ministers, some said only 1 or 2. No matter what the reasons might be, the Supreme Leader's letter has arrived, meaning that the disagreement or dispute between Khamenei and Ahmadinejad has entered a new term. Here, amidst his ministerial crew, Ahmadinejad finds himself surrounded by people who say no to him, so he has to oust them. Is this a transfer from the crisis of disputes between the reformists and the conservatives to a dispute between the ruling camp of conservatives themselves? In both cases, the common denominator is Ahmadinejad. The latest developments of the situation in Iran can answer the question. In a few days, on August 5th to be precise, the elected president will take the oath of office, and after that he has a week to present his government to the parliament. In the parliament there are other opponents of Ahmadinejad who belong to the camp of the conservatives who had denounced loyalty to the supreme leader. President of the council, Ali Larijani, is one of these opponents. He also doubted the credibility of the results of the election. Will Larijani and the camp of conservatives go ahead and besiege Ahmadinejad inside the chamber of the parliament, preparing to overthrow him constitutionally by themselves instead of the reformists? This is a possibility which may come in response to the former President Khatami's call for a public referendum over the legitimacy of Ahmadinejad's victory in the election. Another possibility, which was adopted by Rafsanjani, who implicitly called for preserving the Republican nature of Iran as opposed to the Islamic regime. Many think that during the last period, the Iranian public has been subject to humiliation and oppression, as their votes were stolen, their election constituents were scattered and conflicting because of Ahmadinejad. It's time to restore the republic before it collapses, said the supporters of the reformists.
With us is Al Jazeera's bureau chief in Tehran, Mohammad Hassan al-Bahrani. Mohammed, what's the situation like for the president of Iran just several days before he takes oath in the office?
Yes, Abdul Qadir. I should start by pointing out that the media official in the president's office, Mohammed Jafar Zada, announced a while ago that the president rejected the resignation of the Minister of Culture and Islamic Guidance, Safar Harandi. He also said that the current government of Ahmadinejad will not fall in the trap of holding a vote of confidence against it by the Iranian parliament according to Article 136 of the Constitution, after Ahmadinejad reconsidered the matter in the last moments. Regardless, there are many guesses in the media doubting the future of the relationship between the fundamentalists and President Ahmadinejad. Some think that a big rift has appeared in this relationship, and some others think there will be various question marks that the future will face, and the relationship between the fundamentalists and Ahmadinejad will be very sensitive, cautious, and complicated. Amidst this, many believe that President Ahmadinejad will face real difficulties in 3 weeks when he's obliged to present his ministerial slate to the parliament. Many have started to doubt whether President Ahmadinejad will still have a real chance to gain collaboration from the President of the Council in terms of accepting or not accepting his new crew. Serious questions have been raised concerning the credibility of the President and his slogans that he proposed during the last 4 years regarding his unlimited loyalty to the Supreme Leader. Many extreme student organizations and many parliamentary blocs have been doubting these slogans since days ago, and they called for President Ahmadinejad to take a decisive position regarding his loyalty to the Supreme Leader. And if the President does not fulfill his obligation of loyalty to the Supreme Leader, then it is natural that other sides, especially the reformists, shouldn't be questioned about their loyalty to the Supreme Leader and the laws of the Islamic Republic.
From Tehran, Hassan al-Bahrani, thank you very much. The crisis over demands for secession by South Yemen is continuing to escalate, turning the security situation in the country to the worse. This comes as violent clashes erupted between government-backed forces and armed fighters of the Southern Movement forces in the province of Arabiya. Several fighters were killed, raising the death toll to 38 in the province. Some southern Yemenis have called for secession from the north, citing discrimination by the central authorities. North and South Yemen united in 1990. Abdul Rahman Shumairi reports from Sana'a.
The level of violence in parts of southern Yemen is continuing to deteriorate. This news comes after the central government has failed to take effective measures to improve living conditions in the southern provinces following the 1994 civil war. This has led to a political stalemate in Yemen's southern territories.
It started with a demand for our rights. Unfortunately, the authorities did not take our demands very seriously. The most dangerous action taken by the government in the aftermath of the 1994 war was the expelling of thousands of officers from the army.
The human rights issue was turned into a political slogan being adopted by the peace movement of southern Yemen. Today, the movement has raised its political ceiling with demands to secede from the north. The peace movement in the south has failed to introduce a clear political program and also has failed to elect military and political leaders to lead it through the secession process. The southern movement, however, took to the streets in armed confrontation with government forces. This prompted the government to reject the movement's demands.
The demand for secession was triggered in part due to government's failure to address the Southerners' needs. The issue of retired officers will be taken care of this month. Then we will address other troubling issues in the region. As far as those calling for secession, they merely represent themselves and not the entire South.
What makes things worse is the political stalemate being witnessed in the opposition and the authorities. The central government failed to hold a serious national dialogue, which may have spared the country this current crisis.
The government does not act until it's too late. They only acted during, not before or after the protests. What will the future bring? It is unknown.
Amid the lack of trust between the authorities and the opposition, the situation in the southern territories remains fragile and subject to all possibilities. Abdul Rahman Shumari, Dubai TV, Sana'a.
Yemen's security is part of the region's security. This is what General David Petraeus, the head of U.S. Central Command, said in the Yemeni capital of Sana'a after talks with Yemeni President Ali Abdallah Saleh. Petraeus reiterated his country's commitment to cooperate and support Yemen at all levels, including security, military, and counterterrorism.
Amnesty International accused Saudi Arabia of severe human rights violations under the pretext of fighting so-called terrorism. Amnesty International has released a comprehensive report saying that arrested Saudi Arabians face an unknown fate and secretive measures. The report also pointed out the oppression practiced against opposition groups that lack any protection. The organization criticized the international community for not holding Saudi Arabia accountable.
In its new report pertaining to the Saudi Arabian government, Amnesty International released a report about what it called a continuous violation of human rights under the pretext of fighting so-called terrorism. The report said that human rights violations in Saudi Arabia are at a horrific level. It reported that thousands of cases of detentions were carried out in semi-complete secrecy, and many detainees were killed under vague circumstances. Also, secret trials are awaiting hundreds of others. Their fate is unknown, with the possibility of death penalty. In the report, Amnesty International released letters asking for help for Saudi detainees. These people were arrested either under the pretext of fighting terrorism or simply for calling for peaceful reform or their objection towards the tight bonds between Saudi Arabia and the United States and Western countries. These letters compelled the organization to document some cases with pictures and descriptions of the situations in which they were detained.
These detainees were taken away either from their homes or from the schools where they work. They are held for months, sometimes for years, without the right to call their relatives.
The report is comprised of 65 pages, providing a picture of the violations, saying that they were committed in secrecy and the arrests were carried out without any due process or providing any legal support. One of the terrible methods of torture and maltreatment, as mentioned in the report, is beating them up with sticks or fists and hanging them from the ceiling, depriving them of sleep and zapping them with electric shocks.
The new laws that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia legislated do not include guarantees to protect the defendant from maltreatment or torture.
The report did not ignore human rights activists, political reformers, and religious minorities who did not commit any crimes that are recognized by international laws. However, they all found themselves subject to oppression and human rights violation under the pretext of fighting so-called terrorism. Amnesty International's report criticized the Saudi government for using its international influence to escape accountability. Amnesty also criticized the international community for failing to hold Saudi Arabia accountable for severe human rights violations. The report said that this attitude encourages human rights violation. Azif Taftani, Al-Alam.
The Iraq Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki discussed with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi ways to develop Iraqi-American relations after the withdrawal of the U.S. forces from Iraq.
Maliki also met with Defense Minister Robert Gates and expressed the government's desire to strengthen its military and equip it with planes to secure it from external threats.
يأبى رئيس الوزراء نور المالكي والوفد المرافق له على
Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki insisted on using all his time to meet with senior American officials in the U.S. During this trip, he held a meeting at Congress. He met with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and members of the Foreign Relations Committee.
وضحنا للسادة المعنيين
We have explained to concerned parties the security situation, especially following the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Iraqi cities to their military bases. I also explained to them how the Iraqi forces managed to maintain security. This success should be credited to both sides. We also talked about common interest and the importance of implementing what was agreed on pertaining to security and strategic interests.
Today, we have an opportunity to discuss many issues, most importantly, the status of the American forces in Iraq and relations with neighboring countries, in addition to oil and natural gas laws. The Prime Minister was frank in his suggestions. He said there is no need for the U.S. forces to stay in Iraq longer than the period that was agreed upon in the past.
During the meeting, Iraqi officials talked about the nature of efforts that have been exerted in the past period and efforts that were exerted to meet international obligations. The international community must exert a great deal of effort to get out of Chapter 7 since there is no reason left for it to stay in effect.
We talked about sanctions and international resolutions that placed Iraq under the mandate of Chapter 7. Iraq would like to get rid of restrictions imposed on it based on Chapter 7 since Iraq no longer poses a threat to international peace and stability. All of us have confidence that the U.S. and other peace-loving countries will support the Iraqi people in getting rid of Chapter 7.
The path we are on today marks
the beginning of a new relationship, and we will work on developing these relations on several levels. Our relations with Iraq will be like our relations with other independent countries in the world.
إلى وزارة الدفاع الأمريكية البنتاغون والترحيب كان عاليا بالوفد العراقي لكن لم يؤذن لكاميرات التصوير بالدخول.
The Iraqi delegation received a warm welcome in the Pentagon, but cameras were not allowed in. We have learned that the talks were focused on the security situation in Iraq and improving the capability of its security forces. They also talked about deals that were made previously to equip the Iraqi security forces with modern weapons and equipments. Then the Prime Minister and the Iraqi delegation visited the tomb of the unknown soldier. After the formal reception ceremony had ended, Maliki laid a wreath of flowers on the tomb. The situation in Iraq is described as flexible since it can be influenced by the political situation in the world and the region. However, Iraq is not like it used to be in the past. The Iraqi delegation worked on two levels. They worked on the political front to achieve international support and on the security level by carrying out already signed deals to arm and equip the Iraqi army.
And reports say the Israeli army has launched a ground incursion into the Gaza Strip. Our correspondent says 4 Israeli tanks have rolled into the northeast of the Al-Iraqiya refugee camp. 4 bulldozers are also reported to have leveled the area. On Sunday, 2 Israeli forces invaded deep into the same camp in Gaza. Elsewhere in the coastal territory, at least 5 Palestinians died following the collapse of a tunnel connecting Gaza to Egypt. Besieged Palestinians in Gaza have no choice but to bring in their basic needs from Egypt through these tunnels. Britain has announced the end of its bloody offensive against insurgents in southern Afghanistan. British Prime Minister Gordon Brown says the operations have managed to push back the Taliban and break the chain of terror that were linked to Britain. The announcement comes as violence has escalated in Afghanistan since U.S. Marines and British troops launched major offensives in the southern province of Helmand earlier this month. So far this month, 20 British troops have died in that country. The British fatality in Afghanistan has exceeded that of the Iraq War. Our correspondent in Kabul tells us more.
Well, David Miliband's comments are quite contrary to the facts on the ground in Helmand province. It has been expressed by the governor of Helmand province and he told me that there is a big difference between British forces Panther's Claw operation and what the U.S. Marines are doing in Helmand. The British forces Panther's Claw operation was to hunt down the Taliban militants. The governor told me that they see no major achievements because of this British forces operation. The British forces in Helmand do not have the control of a specific districts control, and while the U.S. Marines have so far captured 2 districts, Nawa and Khanishin districts, and the governor told me that this operation has not achieved the expectations and has not fulfilled the expectations that the Helmand people had from this operation. And he told me that yes, the first phase of this operation was a military phase and it has ended. And the second is to hand over those areas that they have under their control to Afghan security forces. But the governor expressed doubt that the British forces do not have the control of a specific district's control. And he told me that the British forces have faced a strong resistance in Helmand province.
Afghanistan's government has signed a ceasefire deal with Taliban militants in a remote Afghan province. A presidential spokesman says the truce was struck on Saturday in northwestern Badghis province near the border with Turkmenistan. Under the deal, the Taliban agreed not to attack presidential candidates in Badghis and to allow them to set up campaign offices there. Afghanistan says it plans to sign similar agreements with the Taliban in other parts of the country to improve security ahead of the August 20th presidential elections. Violence across Afghanistan has escalated since thousands of U.S. Marines began a major offensive in the southern Helmand province earlier this month. Pakistani helicopters have killed 20 militants and destroyed 4 hideouts, including a training center for would-be bombers in that country's restive northwest. A military spokesman says the airstrikes in Taraf Valley were ordered after an intelligence tip-off. Pakistan has switched its attention back to tribal areas after a summer campaign against the militants in and around the northwest district of Swat. The military says around 1,800 militants and more than 160 security personnel have been killed in the SWAT operations. A bomb blast has killed at least 4 people and wounded 9 in the town of Fallujah in the west of the Iraqi capital of Baghdad. The blast targeted a tent where a funeral was being held for a police officer killed in another explosion on Sunday. 5 people were killed by a car bomb in the same town. Violence in Fallujah appears to have picked up in recent weeks. Iraqi officials have warned that militants try to undermine confidence in the government's ability to ensure security after the U.S. Army retreated from urban areas less than a month ago.
Get more news about the Middle East online at linktv.org/Mosaic. The Mosaic webpage offers a complete archive of Mosaic programs, program transcripts, the Mosaic video podcast, and the Mosaic Intelligence Report, a weekly analysis of the hottest stories from the Middle East. The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible with the support of viewers like you. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs which connect you to the world.